A heavy silence blanketed the auditorium as Police Chief Troy Carr stepped to the mic, his voice thick with emotion, while asking everyone to stand for the presentation of the colors. As Carly Wilcox prepared to sing the national anthem, a gentle reminder was whispered through the crowd to silence their cell phones, pausing the outside world to honor a fallen hero.
His dedication to this city will never be forgotten.
The chief looked over the sea of uniforms, acknowledging the crushing grief that brought them together, a tragic nightmare they prayed would never happen.
Profound dedication and sacrifice embodied by the Meridian City Police Department.
On the evening of February 13th, 2020, a fierce protector named K9 Hondo was stolen from them. He was the absolute heart of the Harriman force, the best friend to Sergeant Ben Ricks, and a deeply loved fixture in the Ricks household. The community had gathered to pay ultimate respect to a true warrior who laid it all on the line. First and foremost, Chief Carr offered his deepest, heartfelt condolences to Ben, Robin, Damien, and Preston. He then turned his attention to the brothers and sisters in blue.
May perpetual light shine upon them, O Lord, and for the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Praying.
The firefighters and the officers who traveled from across the entire country, wrapping them in a message of absolute solidarity and profound gratitude. That same deep appreciation poured out to the local community, rolling across the entire state of Utah and the nation, thanking everyone for the endless waves of love. The chief laid out the path for the memorial, starting with a prayer led by Chaplain Paul Folks.
Though the light may dim.
Following that quiet moment of reflection, the room would listen to the deeply moving words of Deputy Chief Chad Reyes.
To find who did this. But first, we have to come to terms with this. This tragedy has
Sergeant Louis Lovato, and the very people who called Hondo family Damien and Preston Ricks, a heartfelt.
I want to honor K9 Hondo, whose portrait you now see. He exemplified the noble spirit of the force and served our community bravely.
We honor his memory and his service to our community.
Visual journey of the dog's life would play next, leading into the chief's tearful farewell, before the final ceremonial honors were explained by Lieutenant Cody Stromberg. As the solemn procession loomed closer, the podium was handed over to the chaplain to lift the heavy room up in prayer.
My heart breaks for your loss.
Bowing his head, the chaplain spoke of the dark shadows that sometimes seem to win out. He spoke of that terrible night, just 16 days prior, when K9 Hondo fell in the line of duty. It was a vicious blow that stole away one of the bravest, most highly awarded service dogs in the state, brutally ripping him away from Sergeant Ricks, his loving family, and his police brotherhood. For those raw, agonizing reasons, the tears flowed freely. They cried because Hondo had woven himself into the very fabric of the city, a steady and comforting heartbeat in their lives. He was a majestic creature, gifted with a relentless, unmatched drive to hunt down danger, a primal instinct that no human could ever match. But beyond the badge, his fierce loyalty to Ben was the stuff of legends. The countless, exhausting hours they spent training built an unbreakable bond, and the results were staggering. He was a guardian angel for the entire city, but to call him just a police dog would be a total disservice. He was blood. He was a brother to the officers, a beloved soul from his early days at the unified force, and an essential piece of the city staff's daily joy. He melted the hearts of every local resident he met on patrol, but above all else, he was the protective soul of the Ricks home. His sudden absence ripped a massive, agonizing void in every single person who knew him. Yet, even when the darkness threatens to consume everything, flashes of pure light break through to prove that love wins, and Hondo was that brilliant, blinding spark. The dog's fearless courage, his iron will, and his ultimate, tragic sacrifice stopped a monster dead in its tracks. Throwing himself into the line of fire to shield Ben and the rest of the squad, Hondo traded his own breath so his team could make it home to hug their kids. And while the grief of losing him
This dedication is crucial for the K9
feels suffocating, an overwhelming wave of gratitude washes over the crowd, knowing not a single human officer perished in that chaotic gunfire.
We gather here today to honor the memory of our fallen officers.
Standing in that same heavy room for the third time in just a handful of years, they raised their eyes upward, fiercely thankful that the human heroes got to walk back through their front doors. It doesn't erase the crushing agony of the fallen dog, but it deeply highlights the sheer gravity of a dog's devotion. Hondo's split-second decision to take the bullet naturally plants a deep seed of thankfulness in their chests, mirroring the purest form of love where a soul willingly lays down its life for another.
The commitment we make is not
Through his selfless act, Hondo became a breathing testament to courage, showing exactly what it means to bleed for your pack. The chaplain offered a final, tearful thanks for the four-legged heroes watch over the streets, sending prayers of strength to the shattered Ricks family and the mourning officers who strapped on their vests every single morning to face the unknown. It was a stark reminder of the quiet, agonizing sacrifices made by the families waiting at home, all so the innocent could sleep peacefully. With a gentle plea for divine protection over the badge, the memorial prayer came to a quiet, reverent close.
That I stand before you today to confirm the tragic loss within our department.
This is a difficult day for
Taking the
Harriman
stage
City Police
next,
Department.
Deputy Chief Chad Reyes
We
looked
ask
out
for
at the
community's
tear-stained
patience.
faces, his voice steady but thick with
We look
shared
at this
pain
harness
as he
and we
echoed the
remember
profound
K9
gratitude
Hondo. He stood for courage, loyalty,
to
and
every
dedication
soul
until
who
his
paused
final
their
watch.
lives to stand in the presence of a legend. They were there to honor Hondo, not just a dog, but a fierce gladiator, and
As the
a
lights
savior
dim
in
into this
fur.
twilight
Reyes
watch,
poured out
we
his thanks for the
acknowledge Hondo's
tidal wave
final
of compassion
call.
that had kept
His
Ben and
service
his
to our
family
city
afloat,
is
wrapping the entire department in a warm embrace. Most importantly, he looked directly at Ben, deeply humbled and honored to be given the sacred space to speak about the fallen hero. Drawing from his own gritty past running with police dogs, and his current seat in the upper brass, Reyes knew firsthand the magic of the leash. He talked about the burning question civilians always ask: what makes a K9 so incredibly special? For years, he had wrestled with finding the exact words, desperately searching for the perfect way to explain the unexplainable. The raw truth was, unless you felt the tug of that lead and held the absolute trust of one of these magnificent beasts, human language falls completely flat.
Their sacrifice will forever
No
be
sentence
etched
could
in our
ever
hearts.
capture the pure soul of
And
what a
though they are
working dog
gone, Their spirit guides us still.
truly represents.
The pain
Even
of this
calling
day
them
is
a
immense,
police dog
but
completely
so is the
missed the
pride I
mark.
feel
They
for
might
the men
start
and
out as
women who
playful
serve this
pups,
community.
tumbling around like any other pet,
The events
but the
of last
second
night have shaken us all.
their
But let me
heart
be
connects
clear,
with a
we will
cop's
not
heart,
rest
they
until
transform into
justice
pure
is served
magic.
for the victims
Some
and their
folks
families.
mistakenly label them as just
His
equipment,
commitment to
but
the
those who
force was
know
unwavering.
they are absolute
We honor his
lifelines.
memory by continuing his legacy of service and compassion.
People
I'll
often
never forget
mistake
his
these
laugh.
incredible dogs
Even
for
on the
mere
toughest
tools,
days, he found
just
a way
living
to make us
equipment
smile.
built to provide a
It
service.
was an honor
And
to serve
sure,
with him.
a police
Today, we
canine
honor
tackles
the memory of a
jobs
true
that
hero.
even the brightest
His
human
service
minds and
embodied
most
the highest
advanced
dignity of this
technology
department.
could never dream of
We'll carry
replicating.
his legacy forward.
And he would make these purposeful, human-like
But these
sounds.
brave four-legged
A
souls step
series
into
of
the line
sharp,
of fire by
intelligent
their own
yips.
choice, driven by a boundless
We
heart,
often forget
raw
they are
mindfulness,
animals.
and unmatched
But this
determination.
K9 showed a human-like depth of thought, true reasoning, and today we
Something
remember
magical
the
happens
bravery
when
and
these
dedication
majestic
of those
dogs
we
forge a
lost.
true symbiotic bond with their human
The
partners.
sacrifices are heavy, and the weight of command is a burden I carry
It is the
daily.
absolute merging of
But we
two
will
separate
not falter.
spirits into a single, unstoppable force, where each flawlessly fills in the gaps of the other's limitations.
Prepare for apprehension.
The handler suddenly gains heightened senses, lightning speed, and raw power, while the canine absorbs. Human reasoning and a profound, calculating sense of purpose. It is a breathtaking harmony that defies all explanation. Not every police canine team is lucky enough to find that elusive, lightning in a bottle connection. Plenty of units manage to scrape by and find some level of success. Sometimes because an absolute powerhouse of a dog carries an average officer. Or perhaps because a relentless, hard-working handler makes up for a mediocre dog. The hard truth is that the deep, unbreakable symbiosis
be etched in the heart of this department and the city he so bravely served. We thank you.
required for true greatness just refuses to take root most of the time. But every once in a blue moon, destiny steps in and pairs one extraordinary animal with one phenomenal human. Hondo and Ben became an absolute legend together. Moving as a single heartbeat, they swept drugs off the unforgiving streets, tracked down terrified missing kids, dragged fugitives from the shadows, hauled in endless trophies from intense competitions.
Inspired by your example, we have the watch now.
And locked up some truly dangerous criminals. Their brothers in blue had the profound privilege of watching that legendary evolution unfold.
When I look at this flag, I see the courage, the dedication,
They watched a scrawny, undersized Malinois, straight out of Germany, build an unbreakable bond with his handler, transforming into an absolute powerhouse of a police dog. The squad witnessed the agonizing lows and the mountaintop highs. They learned to navigate the dog's hilarious little habits and felt the heavy weight of Ben's occasional frustrations.
I see the pain in your eyes, and I
But
want you
more
to
than
know that
anything,
we are grieving
they
with
felt
you.
the undeniable
We
pride
stand here
radiating
today,
from Ben
forever in
every
their
time
debt.
his beloved partner
Their
secured a
sacrifice,
triumphant
though heavy,
victory.
lights the path forward for all of us. It is with the deepest respect that we honor their memory. Their
One of
commitment to
Hondo's
govern the
funniest
city
little
will
quirks,
forever
which
be
always
remembered.
brought a warm smile to the
It is with
crew
the
while
heaviest
driving
heart I
Ben
stand
absolutely
before you.
crazy, was his desperate
The
need
men
to
and
talk
women of the
back.
Harriman
It
City
did not
Police
matter if
Department
Ben
are
commanded him to heel
Gross name.
or to lay down. Hondo absolutely had to have the last word. Every single order
watch is
that Ben
ended.
barked out
We have
was
the
instantly
watch
met
now.
with a sharp, enthusiastic
to
little
remember
yap
you
that sounded
always.
exactly like he was shouting, "Yep." Ben would roar for a heel, and Hondo
We'll
would
miss
hit
him
him with a
dearly.
yep before
His
snapping
spirit will
right into a
always be with the
flawless,
force.
razor-sharp
It is
position.
with the deepest regret
Now,
I stand
while
before
those
you
vocal
today
outbursts
to
were
announce
undeniably adorable, a dog that yells back is not exactly ideal for sneaking up on bad guys in the dead of night.
Standing here, it's hard
But
to
they
express the
painted a
depth of our
beautiful
loss.
picture of a dog whose
We ask
entire
that you keep the
universe
families in your
revolved
thoughts
around
tonight.
making his handler endlessly happy. When the terrible day came, Ben entrusted his closest friend with the agonizing task of speaking on his behalf, of delivering those final, heart-wrenching words. For days, that friend wrestled with the crushing weight of figuring out exactly what Ben would want the world to hear. Entirely consumed by a tidal wave of love, deep respect, and overwhelming gratitude. It was an immense thankfulness for a dog's unwavering loyalty, his endless affection, and the ultimate, devastating price he paid. Thank you, sweet hero, the final tribute echoed, for bringing our brother home to his wife, his babies, and his crew. Rest easy in Valhalla, mighty warrior.
You know that look, that humanized enthusiasm. He'd just look up and give me the
The story of this legendary unit ran deep. Officer Luis Lovato, a veteran of the Unified Police Department, had spent almost his entire career running alongside Ben in the K9 unit. Back in 2009,
I remember Handler Miller telling me his K9 once mistook a plush toy for evidence right in the middle of a drill.
He brought joy,
Luis was handling
even in the
explosives
hardest
detection
moments.
when their
But now
boss,
we face
Randy
the solemn
Thomas,
reality of
finally
this
gave
service
Ben
with
his
grief.
first
Officer,
shot at the K9
this is
life.
K9 Apollo.
They
He's
handed
yours
Ben
now.
a Malinois
Continue the
named
narcotics
Bear.
training on the crates.
Yes, sir. We're ready.
Nobody
he's all yours
wanted
now.
to call
Take
the
it slow.
sweet dog
Hey there,
outright
buddy.
stupid,
We're
but
gonna
let
be a
us
great
just say
team.
Bear was severely lacking in the brains department. Ben had to fight an
Over.
uphill battle from
Good
day
boy.
one.
Excellent job. Let's go.
A few months later, Luis moved into the K9 unit full-time as a dual purpose
Strong bond.
handler,
They are
and about
definitely ready
5
for
months after
certification,
that,
Sergeant.
another spot opened up. Ben was absolutely itching for it. Running a K9 was his
Yes, good job. You did
ultimate dream, and every single guy
Very
on the
impressive
squad
control,
knew
Ben.
deep
Well done.
down that
They're
Ben was
completely in
built for the
sync.
job. Now, in the policing world,
Thank you both
it is
for coming
standard
in.
practice to aggressively
We have a
campaign and
serious
butter up the
situation
brass
developing
to get your
downtown that
buddies
requires
into
your
your
immediate
unit.
attention.
So, the squad went to bat for him. They cornered the sergeant, laying
Sir,
out
If we don't act now, we lose the element
every
of
single
surprise.
reason why Ben belonged with
moving
them
the
and
evidence
why the
tonight.
team desperately needed his talent.
I've
But the
thought about
boss
this
was
all
not the
week.
only hurdle
I can't see another way forward. I have to take the transfer.
they had to conquer. Ben's wife, Robin,
I know
was
this is hard to
terrified
hear,
at the
but
thought of a trained
I had
attack
to make
dog
a
living
choice.
under the same
It
roof
wasn't easy.
as their
I just hope
tiny
you can
son,
understand why I
Preston.
did it.
Someone had to
I know
step
it's
in
difficult, but
and
you
do
have
some
to understand
serious
the
sweet
situation.
talking. One
Hello,
night,
I'm
a
here to
fellow
discuss
officer
something.
knocked on their door,
We appreciate your
sat down at Ben and Robin's kitchen
However, there
table,
are still some
and pulled out all the
inconsistencies in your
stops.
statement we
He
need to
leaned in,
clarify.
deploying every ounce of psychological charm.
I understand this is difficult news. We are doing everything we can, but the outcome does not look promising. We're doing everything
He
we
had.
can, but we
He
haven't
dropped
found
some
any new
insider
leads at the
police
scene.
secrets to ease her worried
God.
mind, things the public never
What does
gets
that mean for us? I have to do this,
to
Sarah.
hear.
It's my duty.
And with
I
a
know, but
totally
please be
straight
careful.
face, leaning on years of deep brotherhood,
We'll cover for you here.
he delivered
I
the
need you
ultimate
both to
pitch,
listen very
swearing up
carefully.
and down that K9
If we don't
handlers were
handle
just
this correctly,
undeniably the
someone is going
absolute
to
best-looking
jail.
guys on the force.
I know
There is
this
an
hard,
unspoken
but I
truth
have
in
to do
police
this.
work.
It's my
Patrol
duty, and I
officers
won't
bring the
back
street
down.
smarts, detectives hold the
need you both
courage,
to
and the
understand
SWAT
that.
team brings the heavy hits.
just
But
don't know what's
K9
gonna happen
handlers
now.
possess a raw swagger,
It's gonna be okay. We'll get through this
a
together.
profound coolness
Together.
that absolutely outshines any stiff
They are
administrator
closing in.
with shiny stars
We
on
need to
their
move
collar.
fast if we want to protect
Stepping
the
into that
evidence and
world
clear my
required
name.
total commitment, which began the moment Ben secured his wife Robin's blessing. With her unwavering support, Ben transitioned into the K9 unit, while his closest peers made a heartfelt promise to Robin, vowing that her husband and his future K9
Who's the
partners
best dog in
would
the
evolve
world?
into top-tier legends.
You are. You are.
They painted a vivid
I love
picture
you,
of Ben
buddy.
and his dogs sweeping both state and national championships, bringing home the most prestigious hardware imaginable. Observers confidently predicted the duo would command absolute respect from every single badge in the valley. It sounded like blind faith at the time, but remarkably, every single word of that prophecy became reality. The moment Ben locked in his role as a full-time handler, an incredible metamorphosis took place, launching his relentless journey to become an absolute master of K9 training. He cut his teeth alongside his very first dual-purpose partner, a fierce protector named Capone, surrounded by veteran officers who initially believed their own decades on the street gave them superior wisdom. Those older guys assumed their massive head start in the K9 world meant they held all the answers. But that arrogant illusion shattered into pieces in just a matter of weeks. Ben was an absolute sponge, eagerly absorbing and immediately applying every ounce of tactical brilliance he could pull from legendary handlers and master trainers in the field. Honoring the powerful legacy of the great mentors who paved the way, Ben completely immersed himself in the craft, obsessively dissecting every single nuance of police dog psychology.
Steady now. Good boy. Yes.
He developed an uncanny ability to mold his teaching style, flawlessly adjusting his approach to match the exact learning rhythm of any handler he mentored, with maybe one hilarious exception.
Search. Find him.
No matter what brilliant techniques Ben tried to deploy, he simply could not figure out how to stop his buddy Chad from constantly tripping over his own 2 feet during their intense training drills.
Good boy, great job.
Heartbreak quietly crept in when Capone passed away from natural causes in 2015, but destiny swiftly intervened, bringing Hondo into Ben's life later that exact same month. Anyone who missed out on meeting Hondo face to face definitely remembers his iconic photographs featuring those wildly adorable, floppy ears, though he actually wasn't born with that signature look. During their earliest days together, Hondo rocked the traditional, alert pointed ears of a fierce Malinois, but a relentless, maddening itch drove him to scratch so furiously that he actually snapped his own ear cartilage. In the blink of an eye, he accidentally transformed himself into the world's most lovable, floppy-eared warrior, a goofy feature that made him an absolute superstar during community demonstrations.
Wow, did you see that? He's so
At those lively public events, the officers cherished playing a little guessing game with the local kids, eagerly asking the crowds to identify the different breeds showing off their skills. The responses were always predictably cute, mostly guesses of German Shepherd, which made total sense, considering most 5 to 7-year-olds aren't exactly seasoned experts on Belgian Malinois genetics. Then came that unforgettable afternoon when a little boy politely raised his hand, waited for permission to speak, pointed his tiny finger straight at Hondo's majestic but goofy face, and innocently asked if the highly trained police dog was just a street mutt. The crowd erupted in giggles, but Ben, fiercely protective of his best friend, completely failed to see the humor in that punchline. The underlying mystery behind Hondo's frantic ear scratching was finally traced back to severe allergies, sending Ben on an obsessive, loving mission to find a cure and bring his boy some peace. Suspecting a stubborn food sensitivity, Ben completely overhauled the dog's nutrition plan, eventually importing a bizarre, premium kibble made entirely of kangaroo meat, a protein most folks never even dreamed dogs could consume. The grand irony of it all was that his dinner bowl was completely innocent. Medical tests eventually revealed this apex tracking machine was actually severely allergic to common lawn grass. So picture this. A highly lethal, purebred Belgian Malinois, sporting broken, floppy ears, dining exclusively on exotic kangaroo, and constantly battling the very suburban lawns he was sworn to protect. The beginning of his street career was definitely a bumpy ride, plagued by a frustrating streak of pure clumsiness, where he'd constantly slice open a paw, require painful stitches, and end up benched for weeks. There was even an incident where he totally shattered a tooth and had to be fitted with a terrifying titanium replacement, knocking him out of commission for another long stretch. It honestly felt like every single time he leaped into or out of the patrol cruiser, he managed to scrape himself up, earning him the hilarious squad nicknames of Bubble Wrap and the Insurance Liability. But that awkward, accident-prone phase faded quickly. Once Hondo fully grasped his noble purpose, he and Ben fused into an unbreakable, awe-inspiring force of nature. They morphed into a relentless hurricane, hunting down dangerous fugitives and sniffing out hidden narcotics across the absolute entirety of Salt Lake County and well beyond its borders. Hauling in first-place trophies at fiercely competitive state and national trials, they unquestionably cemented themselves as the absolute gold standard for what a K9 partnership should represent. Echoing the famous swagger of LeBron James announcing he was taking his unmatched talents down to South Beach back in 2010. Ben and Hondo packed up their legendary skills in 2018 to join the newly minted Harriman Police Department, aggressively hitting those surprisingly wild streets. Hondo's tracking instincts were so dialed in by that point that he was successfully busting hardened criminals and unearthing massive drug stashes in a quiet suburb where nobody even believed crime existed. Operating at a breathtaking, elite frequency night after grueling night, their stellar reputation rippled outward, ultimately catching the serious attention of the United States Marshal Service. The federal agency knew exactly what kind of firepower they were looking at, eagerly recruiting Ben and his four-legged warrior to step up and serve.
We accept the challenge, Director.
On their elite violent fugitive apprehension strike team, widely known as V-Fast, the tactical reasoning was crystal clear, as deploying a beast like Hondo instantly wrapped a vital layer of security around the squad. He became their furry shield in the pitch black, a fearless protector who fundamentally altered the odds, making the absolute worst-case scenarios infinitely safer for the good guys breaching the doors. Then came the harrowing, fateful night of February 13th, when the task force was actively hunting a cowardly, ruthless predator who had spent his entire pathetic life victimizing the innocent. A meticulous, airtight tactical net was cast to cage the fugitive safely, but the desperate criminal made a chaotic, split-second decision to run blindly into the dangerous night. Without a single fraction of hesitation, Hondo launched into the pursuit, a furry missile locked onto evil, with his fiercely devoted dad, Ben, sprinting right on his heels. They were simply two of the most spectacular, brave souls to ever wear a badge, barreling headfirst into the darkness with a shared, pounding heartbeat, determined to protect the innocent and shield their fellow officers. Their bond defined the purest essence of loyalty, an unspoken vow to lay down their lives for their brothers and sisters in blue, and above all else, to fiercely protect each other. An old, gritty law enforcement saying perfectly captures that raw courage. When you are actively charging into the mouth of hell, no warrior has ever whispered, "Man, I wish we brought a cat."
Don't you dare close your eyes.
The strike team was profoundly grateful to have Hondo leading the charge that terrifying evening, but as history painfully recorded, that beautiful, brave boy suffered a fatal gunshot wound in the ensuing chaos. He gave his last full measure of devotion in the dark, and while heavy tears fall freely today as the world mourns a fallen hero, we must push through the agonizing grief to loudly, proudly celebrate his magnificent, selfless life. The air hung heavy with the weight of loss, yet a profound sense of pride pierced through the grief, for Hondo had given everything, while doing the very thing that filled his brave heart with purpose, shielding the streets he was sworn to guard. He threw himself into the line of fire to shield his brothers in uniform, and most importantly, his handler and true best friend, Officer Ben, because that magnificent dog offered up his own life. A terrible darkness was completely wiped away from the city streets on that fateful evening, ensuring that Ben walked through his front door alive to wrap his arms around his family and remain a guiding light for his two beautiful boys, Damien and Preston, while staying a devoted partner to his loving wife, Robin. Because of a dog's unmatched loyalty, a good man would keep protecting the neighborhood, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brothers and sisters in blue. That alone is a miracle worth celebrating, a reason to look up to the sky and whisper a tearful thank you to the best boy there ever was. May his brave soul run free forever. Looking out at the massive sea of supporters, the family felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude for every single soul who showed up to honor him. Looking back on the very beginning, the boys would always smile, remembering the day their new furry brother arrived, back when the older son had been visiting his mom out in the state of Virginia. The teenager had walked right through the front door and accidentally called out the name Capone, completely forgetting that a brand new recruit had joined their ranks. He stepped inside, fully expecting the familiar rush of paws scrambling across the floorboards to greet him, exactly the way the older family dogs always did whenever he dropped his heavy backpack after long hours of classes. He joyfully shouted for Buster, who immediately sprang up with tail-wagging excitement. But when he casually called out the wrong name to the new K9 hero, the tough dog just sat right there, staring blankly like a furry statue. The magnificent animal shot a hilarious, puzzled glance over at Ben, practically rolling his eyes as if asking his partner who on earth this clueless kid was. Yet, that initial icy demeanor melted when the majestic dog finally trotted over to accept a few gentle head scratches. But the moment the younger brother bounded down the wooden stairs and shouted his actual name, Hondo practically bulldozed past the older sibling like a freight train, showering the little guy with pure canine joy. It took a solid 7 days for the older boy to permanently memorize his real title.
Yeah, good dog.
You got it, good boy. Bring it back.
Go get the ball, go get it.
Not long after, the poor pup developed a relentless itch, viciously pawing at his ears until the family had to rush him to the animal clinic. The oldest son still remembered how he
What's the matter, buddy?
It's okay, we're right here, don't worry.
tagged along for the ride, only to absolutely lose his composure at the gruesome sight of the medical procedure, tumbling straight onto the clinic floor in a dead faint.
Somebody get a doctor quickly! Hey, look at me!
After that incredibly dramatic ordeal, they grabbed a quick drive-through dinner, and once safely back inside their cozy home, the boy knelt down right at eye level with his furry sibling. He jokingly scolded the giant beast, telling him that the entire fainting spell was completely his fault. The sweet boy, blissfully unaware of the mild reprimand, simply responded by showering the kid's cheeks in sloppy, affectionate kisses. They ended up sitting side by side on the carpet for a solid 10 minutes, forging a bond that would never break. Whenever Ben and Robin would pack their bags to escape the city for a quick weekend getaway, the two loyal guardians would proudly claim the teenager's bedroom as their personal sleepover fortress.
We'll be back
Like
soon.
clockwork, right at 6 in the morning, the heavy thud of paws would announce that the energetic police dog had planted his hefty frame directly on top of the sleeping boy's chest. He would launch a relentless wake-up campaign,
morning,
aggressively washing the teenager's groggy face
You are so silly.
and trampling all over the mattress with his massive paws until his human finally surrendered. It was his special way of demanding an early breakfast, basically threatening to steal the warm bedding right off the mattress. A hilarious threat he actually carried out one frosty morning. The boy had jolted a one awake, shivering to the bone, only to discover every single quilt dragged onto the fur hardwood, where the two mischievous hounds had constructed the ultimate plush nest for themselves. Those beautiful, chaotic memories would forever echo in the family's hearts, an enduring comfort on such a dark day. The younger brother shared his own treasured pieces of the puzzle, painting a vivid picture of a fierce warrior who was secretly the world's biggest couch potato. In the safety of their living room, there was a specific, oversized, throw blanket that practically belonged to the furry giant. He had a hilarious obsession with soft cushions, demanding an absolute mountain of fluff scattered around him, because this elite, highly trained hero refused to settle down unless his lounging setup was nothing short of luxurious. During family mealtimes, while supposedly napping on the upholstery, he would casually prop his massive head right over the armrest, silently begging for table scraps with those big, soulful eyes. Aside from working, his absolute favorite hobby was snoozing, and whenever he fell into a deep, dream-filled slumber, he would flip completely upside down. With all four paws pointing toward the ceiling, he looked ridiculously adorable. The only sign of life was the rhythmic, soft thumping of his tail wagging against the cushions. Countless times, Robin,
Look how good he is.
all the boys would drop down onto the living room rug right in front of him, and the loyal guardian would mirror their movements, sitting tall and proud. They would lean their cheeks against his sturdy, muscular shoulder, melting into his warmth while
Look at that tail go.
gently rubbing his ribs. He was an absolute sucker for tenderness, soaking up every ounce of affection like a sponge. If there was a gentle hand offering a belly rub,
He loves this, doesn't
he was instantly in heaven, trading his tough police armor for the soft soul of a family pet. There were incredibly goofy moments where he would literally park his heavy rear end onto the... On incredibly rare occasions, the mighty patrol dog tolerated ridiculous fashion shows with remarkable patience. Once, they slid tiny winter socks onto his paws, turning his powerful stride into a hilarious, high-stepping dance across the floorboards. Another unforgettable evening involved a cozy sweatshirt, which Ben managed to thread his own hands through from behind, making it appear as though the fearless officer possessed a pair of human arms. Beyond the silly antics, he was an extraordinarily compassionate soul who instinctively knew when someone needed a comforting touch, wrapping the family in invisible warmth during their darkest hours. He captured the hearts of the entire community, and though the shattering grief of his sudden departure brought out agonizing cries and tears that rivaled the heaviest rain, his beautiful spirit remained an undeniable gift from heaven itself. The timeless vow of the working dog echoed powerfully through the silent room, a sacred promise that his sharp vision had always belonged to his handler, vigilantly scanning the shadows to keep the family safe.
He's the best dog ever. You are such a good boy. Yes, you are.
He offered up his keen hearing to catch the faintest whispers of danger in the dead of night, and used his powerful scent to track down any threat that dared approach their peaceful sanctuary, happily trading his own heartbeat so his dad could return home to embrace the ones he loved most. As the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio for the final time, the crushing reality of his absolute departure washed over the crowd. The ultimate sacrifice had been forever stamped into history, marking his incredibly heartbreaking last call. The heavy burden of the badge begs a relentless question. If not the brave, then who will stand against the darkness? Yet, for those who wear the uniform, it is an undeniable oath, a fearless declaration made by the extraordinary protectors across the nation, who willingly sprint into danger without a second thought. They drain themselves physically and emotionally, holding the line with unshakable grit, so the rest of society can sleep soundly under the blanket of liberty. But the silent tragedy lies in wondering who is left to heal the broken hearts of the protectors. For the department leader looking out at the grieving handler, the immense privilege of guiding such remarkable warriors came with a devastatingly heavy cost. It is a commander's highest calling to navigate through the storms, to offer an anchor of stability, and to wrap a shattered precinct in a desperately needed blanket of solace. Yet, watching the agonizing farewell of a heroic K9 revealed a beautiful, heartbreaking truth. It was actually the courage of officers like Ben that fueled the leadership. The profound reverence held for this grieving hero was immeasurable, standing tall as a fiercely devoted mentor, a loving father, and a brilliant tactical partner. The privilege of sharing the battle lines with a man of such stellar character was an invaluable treasure. His exceptionally gentle and grounded spirit remained a rare beacon of hope, continuously pouring a deeply calming energy into the weary veins of the precinct and the fragile neighborhood they patrolled. Watching a warrior of his magnitude crumble under the suffocating weight of losing his best friend completely shredded the souls of everyone watching, leaving an agonizing void in the legacy of a legendary partnership. Watching the memorial unfold, it broke a person's heart to look at Robin and know there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to magically wash away the agonizing grief she carried. Yet, even while drowning in her own sorrow, she became an incredible anchor for everyone else, gracefully forgiving the clumsy words of others and offering quiet strength when comfort was desperately needed. On the darkest night this police family ever faced, the night their beloved defender was killed, it was her warm embrace that gave the command staff the sheer guts to address a devastated department. That kind of profound grace created a debt that could never truly be repaid, speaking volumes about a woman whose infectious warmth and unshakable grit inspired everyone lucky enough to cross her path. And then there was young Preston, who needed to know that his four-legged sibling was a literal legend, a fearless backup to his father, a constant comfort to his mother, and the absolute glue of their home.
we put on this uniform, we swear an oath.
Hondo was
That
far
oath
more
means
than just a
something
badge with
profound in
fur.
our city,
He was
and
the
we
ultimate
carry that
guardian
weight
of their
every
streets,
single day.
possessing a larger-than-life energy that made him feel like a real-life superhero.
Floppy ears and all. Best partner a man could ask for.
Honestly, not even the brilliant mind of Stan Lee could have sketched a comic book character with that much raw courage, leaving behind a legacy so massive that one lifetime simply wasn't enough to tell his whole story.
And you vein before when in. We released the K9.
The entire precinct owed
You
that
could hear
family
his
the world
claws
for sharing
skidding on
such
the
an
pavement
extraordinary
as he
soul,
accelerated,
and watching Officer
closing
Ben
in
work
fast on the
seamlessly with his
suspect.
loyal partner gave every single cop a masterclass in absolute trust. Every badge in that auditorium now carried the heavy, beautiful burden of taking what that K9 team taught them and pushing it out into a resilient, proud Harriman community that would never let his memory fade.
It is our duty to carry on their legacy with honor.
With a voice choked with reverence, the speaker officially promoted the fallen K9 to the honored rank of sergeant, knowing deep down that a brilliant new star was now lighting up the heavens to watch their backs forever. As the heavy hearts in the room prepared to move outside for the final ceremonial tribute, a quiet plea echoed through the silent crowd. The attendees were asked to carry that exact same profound, silent reverence out into the daylight, honoring the emotionally charged atmosphere that had blanketed the entire service. The mourners would slowly make their way out the back, filtering through the western school doors to form a massive, breathtaking wall of respect. This magnificent line of honor was set to stretch down the western walkway toward the North Plaza, with visiting K9 officers and their brilliant four-legged partners taking up their positions. Those brave dogs and their handlers would hold the eastern edge of the concrete, while a towering sea of uniformed first responders stood shoulder to shoulder, holding the western line. Everyday folks and civilians looking to pay their respects and stand in solidarity were directed to an adjacent path, ensuring everyone had a place to witness the heartbreak and beauty of the solemn tribute.
Stay focused now. Easy, boy. We're up next.
A deeply moving pause was carved out right then, allowing all the visiting dog handlers to slip out early so they could gather their loyal K9 partners from their cruisers without rushing. Everyone else was gently asked to stay glued to their seats for just a few moments longer, allowing those specialized teams the quiet space they needed to get set up properly. Out under the open sky of the northern courtyard, a beautifully united guard of honor, bringing together brothers and sisters from the Harriman and Riverton police departments, stood at the ready. Joined by the South Jordan officers and the Unified Fire Authority crews, they prepared to shatter the heavy silence with a 3-volley rifle salute, immediately followed by the hauntingly beautiful, tear-jerking notes of taps.
On behalf of the President of the United States,
it would all lead to that gut-wrenching pinnacle of the ceremony, when a perfectly folded American flag would be pressed into the hands of Sergeant Ben Ricks and his weeping family. These deeply rooted traditions, born directly from the proud heritage of the United States military, served as a stark, visual reminder of the bleeding toll demanded by a life in uniform.
Thank you for your service, partner. We won't
They
forget
were performing these sacred rites to loudly declare to the world that Hondo literally traded his own breath so that innocent people could go home safe to their families.
Sacrifice. Rest easy, partner.
Once the courtyard tributes wrapped up, a massive fleet of flashing emergency cruisers would form up, escorting their fallen furry brother on one spectacular, emotional final patrol through the city. Gliding away from the high school, this silent convoy of police vehicles would trace a careful path towards City Hall, keeping their sirens completely quiet out of pure respect for the ultimate sacrifice. That closed-door gathering at the end of the route was strictly reserved for the law enforcement family, allowing a moment to pour out immense gratitude to the sheer number of first responders who stood strong together.
Thank you. Stay safe.
An overwhelming wave of love was also sent out to the fiercely loyal Harriman community for their incredible support, right before every uniformed officer was asked to march out and form the line of honor. Meanwhile, Sergeant Rick's extended relatives, specifically those who had been sitting tightly together in the front section of the auditorium, prepared for their own somber walk. With members of their family either up on stage or serving in the honor guard, they were instructed to quietly follow Lieutenant Widener toward the exits on the right. Moving as one unified, heartbroken family, they stepped out into the crisp air to officially say their final goodbye to a legend.